We are now going to go into our first round of questions. Starting us off with the Conservatives, Mr. Scheer, you have the floor for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much to all our presenters today. I really enjoyed listening to all the different perspectives on some of the issues that are affecting your various stakeholders today. This may be a question I invite any of the representatives of the municipalities here today to take a crack at. In the last little bit, we've heard a lot from the Auditor General about the lack of this government's ability to keep track of projects, to track whether or not the program is even hitting its own targets, and also a lot about delays, about the backlog in approvals process. So I just wanted to maybe invite any of the representatives of municipalities here today to see if they can speak to that in their experience, why they think that it's taking so long to get approvals through the current government's infrastructure plan.
Mr. Bradley?
We've not found that to be a great problem. It's a dilemma for a government, of course, because Mr. Scheer mentioned, first of all, the fact that you want accountability and that the Auditor General is looking at that. And yet, the more accountable we must be, the more information we must provide. It really means that we probably delay having a project approved. But by and large, we have found the system to be acceptable. The challenge that we have is meeting the specific criteria. And when there's not flexibility in the criteria, it's often difficult to fit it. For instance, an overall allocation of funding, I hate to use the term because you won't want to hear this, but without strings attached is much more valuable than those where there's an established criteria that is difficult to meet. That's the very competitive ones that are based on various municipalities competing, of course, for them. And without that, it's much better for us if we can have that flexibility, because then we can apply the funds to areas we feel are best. But again, there's a contradiction there, because on one hand, you want to please the Auditor General. On the other, if you please the Auditor General too much, there's not flexibility in the program.
Well, if I could take a crack at that, because I think you're absolutely right in terms of the flexibility piece. The accountability piece, though, is important. That's the after the kind of the follow through, to make sure that if a government says we're going to spend this amount of money and we're hoping to achieve these targets, it's not that type of mechanism shouldn't, if done properly, delay in the project approvals. It's more about tracking to make sure the money was spent properly after the fact. But if we can dive down on the flexibility piece, because this is one I absolutely agree with you. We see government announcements for big envelopes of money, all with various lenses and criteria. And we have had some witnesses at this committee point to the various criteria that are preventing good projects that are ready to go to be initiated, because they spend a lot of time trying to fit municipal projects into the various criteria that the government has put forward in the programs. Would your stakeholders, would your municipality like to see a system where we say, okay, Canada's a big country, there's lots of different needs. Some communities need help with public transit, some don't. Certainly some projects like, bike lanes in cities, Regina, not as easy to move around by bicycle as Toronto is. And those types of decisions being left to municipalities themselves. Mayors and councils can inform their voters what types of projects they believe they need. The federal government doesn't need to get into that kind of dictating to the level that it currently is. Would that something that you would generally agree with, or would you have a reaction to that?
Mr. Bradley?
I think that the flexibility is necessary. Let me give an example of the Green Stream programs. We have a wastewater treatment plant that is going to be a new one. The definition or the eligibility requirement is for upgrades or rehabilitations. So to get our interpretation, so we get the funding, we would have to say that the new wastewater treatment plant was indeed an upgrade to the whole system of treating wastewater, as opposed to a specific plant. So just allowing that little bit of flexibility would allow us to be eligible for the kind of funding that we would need. Whereas now, if we were looking at the specific definition, it would say an upgrade or rehabilitation. So mind you, when we have discussions with public officials, with the civil service on this, we can often overcome those problems. And I think allowing the public service to have a little flexibility in this regard would be beneficial to municipalities.
So maybe, Mr. Chair, with the time I have left, maybe if I can invite Mr. Smith, you represent the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. Of course, one of the things that always strikes me when I drive from Ottawa to Regina is just how big Ontario is. You know, it takes a good couple of days just to get out of the province of Ontario. You've got such a wide variety of different types of municipalities of all different sizes and very different regions. Would you like to make a comment on the flexibility aspect of the current infrastructure programs and what your members are telling you?
Mr. Smith?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I think a couple of points to your first point in your original question about is the money kind of flowing. I think that we've got some members that would say, specifically under ICIP, it's been a slow flow at best, and maybe a trickle, and applications for some projects were put in a long time ago, and in some cases still haven't been formally announced. And I know there are bilaterals between the province and the federal government, so I'm not going to speculate on where the logjam is. But municipalities need those dollars and need to be spending them in the appropriate places. And in terms of flexibility in appropriate places in Ontario, we all have asset management plans, and we're all working to improve those plans on a regular basis. So, we have identified the priority projects within the community and adhere to a set of principles and plans to identify those. And so, if we can have programs that allow us that flexibility to spend where we have identified our most urgent needs, so much the better. Predictable, sustained funding that allows us to target investments in all 444 municipalities. That's the goal.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, and thank you, Mr. Scheer. Thank you, Chair Bradley. It's a great way to start off the dialogue today, and great job to all of you. We're now